Hey there everybody, James here, and we are back with another video. So today we're going to be talking about beveling, which is also known as anglage, and kind of showing some examples, showcasing a couple of different watches that have beveling in different ways, and talk about what makes beveling good, what makes it okay, what makes it not as good. So that's why we're going to use the examples of the watches. So if this is your first time stopping by the channel, thanks so much for watching. Please do like and comment and subscribe to the channel. This channel is all about getting out of watches whatever you want to get out of watches, because I want you to know and love the watches that you have, so that you can become a satisfied collector. So without further ado, let's dive into beveling and talk about what it is and see some examples of it. So if you haven't noticed already, I do have a video on the channel all about movement finishing. And so there's a whole bunch of different topics that I cover in that video. Would highly suggest that you watch that, because this video is going to be exclusively about beveling in terms of dial finishing. And what is beveling? It's pretty simple. I mean, basically, it's going to be the polishing of edges of various metal components inside the watch. So this can be things like rotors, bridges, plates, all sorts of different items in there that you can bevel. And typically it's done by hand, using a small file of some sort. A lot of the time, watchmakers will use wood. Actually, there's a special kind of wood that they'll use for beveling that has just the right hardness to it. So there's some nuances to that, and it takes time. I mean, that's the biggest thing about manual finishing on any watch, is it does take time. And so that's why it's such a crucial part of high horology and movement finishing. So let's jump in here. What we're going to do is I'm going to go from what I would think is actually the least impressive to the most impressive here. And I'll introduce the pieces as we talk about them. So again, I've got three here in front of me. The first one that we're going to talk about is my beloved Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Ultra Thin Enamel Series perpetual calendar. Absolutely love this watch. And you know, I would say that the impressive parts of this watch are mostly on the dial. I mean, the work that's into the dial in this is incredible. I will say that although the movement is nice, it's probably not as well finished as some of the other pieces that are out there. So let's just take a look to start at the JLC. And you can see here, this one is the perpetual calendar movement from JLC. And it is nicely decorated. It's the 868 version 2. And you can see my full review of it on the channel. But we're talking about beveling today. So let's take a look at this movement. I'll get as close as I can to actually see what can we find on the beveling. So again, beveling, typically you're going to notice it on rotors. The rotor is this piece of an automatic watch right here, and it's basically an oscillating weight that helps to wind the watch. Right here behind that is the keyless works, which actually are responsible for winding the barrel. And that's kind of how the power is replenished, if you will. Obviously, you can do it by the crown, but the rotor is also one way you can do it on automatic watches. So on this rotor in particular, you know, as I get close to it, although there's some interesting Côte de Genève that they've applied here, and it's skeletonized, which I do like, there's not a whole lot in terms of the beveling. And normally, you can see it almost look mirror polished. So you can see as I turn it up a little bit here, you can see the very top part of that rotor is beveled. Now, I don't know on a JLC like this, I don't know that that's hand done. It could be hand done. There are lots of companies that do machine beveling, and the way that you can generally tell is they're much more evenly applied, and they're generally not as high quality. So, you know, it's pretty thin, but you can tell it's there on the rotor on this piece, which is probably the most impressive. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's one of the most impressive parts of the finishing on this watch. But if you look at the bridges, for instance, down here, you can see there's really not much in terms of beveling there. Like, they're pretty much just an edge, and there's no point at which they're angled in. Which is basically what beveling does. And you can see this watch is well loved. It's scratched up and it's worn and all that good stuff. You all know, if you've watched my channel at all, I like wearing my watches, not keeping them in a safe. So again, the beveling here, kind of minimal, a little bit on the rotor, but really not anywhere else. Yes, there's some other decoration that's happening. Again, Côte de Genève, there's some fired blue screws, there's some perlage on the base plate, but for the most part, pretty minimal in terms of the beveling here. So let's take a look at the next watch that we're going to talk about, and that is my Girard-Perregaux 1966 Orion. Again, I've just been loving this thing. The dial, once again, is just fantastic. And this is maybe a little bit of a step up from the JLC in terms of movement finishing. So as you can see, we've got another automatic movement here. Again, perlage on the base plate. And you can see there is some applied beveling on the bridge here. So you can see that they've done a nice clean bevel that goes all the way around the bridges. And you can tell because you can see it's got that mirror-like quality to it, and it's reflective at the very edge. You can see there's some nice solarization as well on the barrel right underneath there. As far as in the middle of the bridges, I'm trying to keep it in focus here. It's a pretty clean cut. It pretty much comes to a point. There's not really any beveling happening there. There is, again, some minimal beveling on the rotor right at the top. But it's very, very minimal, barely even noticeable, honestly. So again, with this one, the most impressive aspect of the beveling is around the bridges themselves. So, it's got this nice kind of circular structure to the way the bridges come together, and they just made a nice clean bevel around the outside. So again, not crazy, but it's nice, nicely done. Côte de Genève again, circular on the rotor. So there's some nice finishing features here. But with that said, some blued screws as well. Let's take a look at the third piece we're going to talk about, and that is Dan Royter. And if you've never heard of Dan Royter, again, you can take a look at my full review that I have on the channel of this watch. But this is my Dan Royter DR02. It's very vibrant blue. Very cool piece, very durable as well. I wear this thing for all sorts of stuff. That's why it's kind of beat up. I'm not keeping these watches in a safe, y'all. So let's take a look at this piece, and I think you'll see right away the level of finishing is just different. It's just different. Now, again, you see some of the same elements, perlage, polished screws, things like that. However, if you look at this rotor, you will see some very deep beveling, and it's actually kind of nice, and I think it's interesting that Dan didn't do the beveling that depth all the way across the rotor. You can see it's deeper here and here, and then it's a little bit more narrow at the top, but there's still some beveling there. So you can see that this was very nicely finished. There's some pretty deep Côte de Genève on the rotor as well, which is really cool. And so let's take a look at some other parts of the movement here. You can see, similar to the Girard-Perregaux on that main bridge in the movement, there is beveling here, but look how wide this is. Like, you can see the light reflecting in it right now. Look how wide that bevel is compared to, again, the JLC, for instance. Like, there's nothing really around the edge there. And then on the GP, you get a little bit of that. There's a little bit of a bevel. But it's nothing compared to the Dan Royter. And there's a lot of other polishing elements going on here. Black polishing on several aspects of the movement, which you can see as I move them across the light there. So this is a chronograph, so you can see there's parts of the chronograph that are black polished. So there is some really, really fine finishing on this Dan Royter movement. And again, it's all relative, right? You could go to super high-end stuff like Moritz Grossman, or you could go and look at Roman Gaultier, and you will see some pretty wild beveling going on there. Something that you haven't seen on any of the watches that I've showcased here are inward angles. You'll hear that term talked about a lot. And basically, that would be like, instead of having a rounded path here, just imagine if it came to a point. And then you will actually see companies bevel and make anglage that comes to a perfect point, and the beveling, kind of comes in from that point And it's extremely hard to do because you can't have a machine do that. You know, you can have a machine do something like this. This was obviously done by hand, but getting to pointed inward angles is really, really hard. And so, you know, you'll often see reviews out there where people will count the number of inward angles on a movement because it's just impressive. It's really hard to do and make it look good. So that's a little bit about beveling. So, I mean, when you talk about even just these three pieces, right? Just looking at these three, very different price points on these three watches. You know, and it doesn't make them better or worse, right? It's not about whether it's more expensive or not. But just thinking about these three, you know, probably the most expensive piece on the table here has the most plain polishing and finishing and beveling. It's not bad. It's just very minimal, you know, and then you kind of have a mid-grade here. The Royter is actually the least expensive piece on the table. And the finishing that Dan puts into these watches, again, is just absolutely incredible when you compare it to the other two. And the anti-reflective coating that he uses, it almost looks like there's not a crystal on the back of this watch. Like you can see it in some lighting conditions, but when you're looking at it from an angle like this, it looks like the back is just open. Like you could just reach in and touch the movement. Of course, there's a sapphire over it, but he really does a fantastic job. So again, if you've not seen Dan Royter or his watches, I would highly encourage you to take a look. This was a very special one. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to talk about. Just a little bit of, you know, the good and the okay with beveling, because I wouldn't say any of these are bad or ugly, you know, in the good, bad, and ugly kind of sense, but just some different examples. So I hope that you found this interesting. You know, take a look out there. There's a lot of companies that do beveling on their movements. You know, companies that are really well known for this. Again, when you talk about Maurice Grossman, Romain Gauthier, those are some of the top end companies, but Patek Philippe, Blancpain, you know, there are so many companies out there that do beveling on their movements and just look beautiful. There's lots of names out there. So take a look, see what you like. Again, it's not only about the finishing. You know, there's so much else that goes into selecting a watch, which I have certainly talked about in a number of different videos, but hope that you found something interesting. And again, my goal for you is that you get out of watches whatever you want to get out of watches, because I want you to know and love the watches you have and become a satisfied collector. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.